talking Today I will be talking about the life and work of Edmonia Lewis. Edmonia Lewis is viewed as the first documented person of African American and Native American descent to achieve international recognition as a sculptor. Lewis primarily worked in a neoclassicism style. There has been much dispute about the details of her life, and as details around her are scant and documentation sometimes conflicting, there is discussion about what information we know is true regarding her, from her birth date and background to her height. Edmonia Lewis is believed to have been born around July 4, 1844, in upstate New York, likely in Greenbush near Albany, based off inconsistent statements made by Lewis and based off her passport information. She established herself as a working artist during the late 1800s, when sculpture was an international affair. While Lewis claims that her mother, Catherine, was a full-blooded Indian, there is evidence that counters that. Catherine Lewis was born in Canada to an African American escaped slave, John Mike, and a mother of African American and Chippewa parentage. Catherine Lewis and her parents lived on the Credit River Reserve that is now known as Mississauga on Lake Ontario. The Mike family were pressured into leaving the reservation because the Council of Elders had voted to exclude Catherine's father, and Catherine, along with her siblings, from having a share in the government grants that the indigenous people living on the reservation were entitled to, since John Mike was black, despite not having any authority to enforce such a ban. The family would move to Albany, New York, where Catherine would marry Robert Lewis, an African man from the West Indies that had worked as a gentleman's servant. Edmonia Lewis's brother, Samuel, would be born in 1832. Then shortly after, the Lewis family relocated to Newark, New Jersey, then again to Greenbush, New York, a village across from Albany, New York, where she was most likely born around 1843 to 1845. Following the passing of both Lewis's parents before the age of 9, her two aunts on her mother's side adopted her and her brother Samuel. They lived with their aunts near Niagara Falls, New York, for about 4 years. There they would make and sell baskets, moccasins, blouses, and souvenirs to the falls tourists in Buffalo, New York, and Toronto. During this time, until her college years, both Edmonia Lewis and her brother Samuel bore their Chippewa names, Wildflower and Sunshine, respectively. Samuel would become one of Edmonia Lewis's greatest patrons, supporting her throughout his life. He placed her in the care of Captain S.R. Mills after he left for California. Lewis enrolled at New York Central College, a Baptist abolitionist school, for the second half of the 1856-1857 academic year. In the summer and fall terms of 1858, Lewis took residence at the college as well. During the summer term, she took courses in the primary department to prepare her for the regular academic courses and collegiate programs. She attended the school for 3 years until, as she stated, she was declared to be wild. Around the age of 15, with the help of Samuel and some aid from the abolitionists, she was sent to Oberlin College in 1859. Lewis boarded with Reverend John Keep and his wife from 1859 to 1863, when she left the college. Keep was a member of the Board of Trustees and an ardent abolitionist and spokesperson for the benefits of coeducation. Between 1835 and 1865, at least 140 black women attended Oberlin College, 80% of whom matriculated into the young ladies' courses proper, after first attending the preparatory courses within the Young Ladies Department. By 1865, 3 black women had received a Bachelor of Arts degree. Lewis and other black women like her, that studied at Oberlin College, were the subjects and objects of domestic imperialism. At Oberlin, Lewis trained for the duties of her sphere and was educated on what was expected of her as a woman to be a caretaker and an educator. On February 11, 1862, the Cleveland Plain Dealer carried the following headline: Mysterious Affair at Oberlin, Suspicion of Foul Play, 2 young ladies poisoned, the suspected one under arrest. Edmonia had been accused of poisoning 2 of her white roommates in the winter. Her roommates and friends planned to go sleighing riding with some young men later that day, and beforehand Lewis served them wine, and they fell ill. The poison in question was found to be the aphrodisiac Spanish fly, and Edmonia Lewis, her lawyer being John Mercer Langston, a African-American alum of Oberlin College himself. Lewis would later be accused of stealing artist materials from a professor but dismissed due to there being a lack of sufficient evidence to uphold the accusation against her. While the Keeps remained supportive of her innocence, no one fought for her this time, and although acquitted, she was refused allowance to register for the term by the principal of the Young Ladies course, and Lewis was unable to graduate because of this. Lewis made the decision to leave. She moved to Boston to pursue her art career, with the support of the abolitionist community, afterwards having gained contacts and education at Oberlin that would benefit her in securing a successful career in the future. There she would train under Edward Brackett, a self-taught sculptor. Throughout her art career, she showed interest in her heritage, and her work alludes to want to connect to her audience. Lewis, as a free Native and African American person, was interested in freedom and emancipation. Then, after the abolishment of slavery, she grew more interested in religious subjects that partially reflect her religious faith of Catholicism. A piece named Forever Free, made in 1867, portrays, for example, the emancipation of African American slaves after the Civil War. Lewis breaks the stereotype of African American women being sexual and erotic figures by having the woman as opposed to the man the one who is fully clothed, while the latter is partially dressed. The piece is symbolic of the end of the Civil War, and one can note that while free, they are still restrained by a chain. A common detail in the couple's inner pieces is how patriarchal society and a past education in the Young Ladies Department affected the way she portrayed the characters and what they symbolize. The male being often representative and the woman often subordinated to the male, such as in Forever Free, where she is kneeling while holding her hands in prayer while an example of a piece with biblical context there is her piece Hagar, 1875, which depicts a heroine from the Old Testament. Hagar, a maid servant, is portrayed wandering for water in the desert after being banished by Sarah, Abraham's wife, who is jealous of Hagar and Abraham's son Ishmael. Hagar may have been chosen to be portrayed by Lewis due to her use as a symbol of courage and survival. Lewis's first successful piece as an artist, however, came from sales of medallions she made of clay and plaster, according to the Smithsonian Magazine. The sculptural portraits she sculpted featured images of renowned abolitionists, including Garrison, John Brown, and Wendell Phillips, an advocate. Her first financial success, however, came in 1864 when she created a bust of Civil War Colonel Robert Shaw, who was a white officer that commanded the 54th Massachusetts Infantry, composed of African American soldiers. Shaw would be killed at the Second Battle of Fort Wagner and buried in a mass grave. The copies of the bust sold well enough to finance her trip to Europe. She traveled to London, France, and Florence before deciding to live and work in Rome in 1866. Harriet Hosmer, a fellow American sculptor, tried to help her succeed. Edmonia was surrounded by artists when in Rome. Interestingly, while most sculptors at the time paid Roman stone crafters to produce their marble works, Louis, who lacked the money to do so, did most. In her first year in Rome, she produced Old Arrowmaker, a piece that represents a portion of the story of Longfellow's The Song of Hiawatha, a poem that would inspire many future work of hers. The piece represents Native Americans in a way that was uncharacteristic at the time, showing a Native American civilization more respect than what was usually given by artists of the day. Native Americans typically being characterized as violent and uncivilized by white artists. While she lived in Rome, Louis created The Death of Cleopatra, which would be her largest work and most powerful piece. In the piece, Louis portrays the lifeless body of Cleopatra, a legendary queen of ancient Egypt, on her throne. The naturalism of the piece had vivid realism to it that was uncharacteristic of the late 19th century. She worked on the piece for 4 years, returning to the United States on occasion to sell smaller pieces to earn the necessary funds to continue working on her masterpiece. In 1876, she shipped the almost 3,000-pound sculpture to Philadelphia so that the piece could be considered by the committee selecting workers for the Continental Exhibition. The piece was thankfully placed in the Gallery K of Memorial Hall. Many people were impressed by the piece, viewing it as masterful, while others criticized its depiction of the moment Cleopatra committed suicide, suggesting it may have been an overstep to do so. Louis, however, may have viewed the piece as Cleopatra being empowered by the act depicted, as she is sealing her own fate, an idea that may have appealed to Louis. Portraying the moment when Cleopatra said her final words and sealed her fate may have enticed her to create the piece. Little is known about Edmonia Louis' later life, leading up to her own death, and it was unknown until a few years ago that she had died according to discovery of death documents in London, England, in 1907. Previously, it has been speculated she spent the last years of her life in Rome. Unfortunately, many of Louis's pieces did not survive, but some have stood the test of time. For some time, Louis has fallen into obscurity, but after she became the subject of a Google doodle of her working on the death of Cleopatra, and she was later featured in the New York Times on July 25, 2008, in its overlooked No More series of obituaries written about women and minorities whose lives had been ignored by newspapers because of the cultural prejudice that revered white men. Edmonia Louis gained more acclaim. Edmonia Louis that she did not want to be praised for her work simply because she was black and indigenous. Though there is another statement with conflicts with this quote, I do feel this quote encapsulates Monia's attitude towards others' perception of her as an artist, and how she felt about the way she had been praised and portrayed in the media. She once said, "Some praise me because I am a colored girl, and I don't want that kind of praise." She said, I'd rather you would point out my defects, for that will teach me something. Lewis throughout her works showed great interest in her heritage, but whether due to her education, a want to connect to her audience, wanting to separate herself more from the female figures, and or her fear of her work not being taken as seriously, some of her pieces do favor more Eurocentric features in many of her female figures. I was interested in talking about her not because of her recent acclaim. I wanted to shed light on an artist and work of a person of color in the past, because I feel that art history does not focus enough on minority artists that were ignored in the past. Edmonia Lewis thrived despite the obstacles and racism she faced throughout her life, and her life is a testament to her success in connection with her background. My research led me to a further understanding about the treatment of Edmonia Lewis and other artists that have until recently been excluded from the spotlight.